The donkey wouldn't move. Not for food, not for water, not even when Wade pulled the rope. But when 12-year-old Sam approached the corral, something changed. The animal's ears perked up, its head turned, and for the first time since Wade had bought it, the donkey took a step forward. Wade had purchased the animal from a traveling trader who seemed eager to sell. "Quiet one," the man had said, counting the coins quickly. "Perfect for a boy who needs a gentle companion." But the trader's eyes had held something else. Relief, maybe even urgency, as if he couldn't wait to be rid of the creature. Now, watching his son with Down syndrome extend his small hand toward the donkey's muzzle, Wade felt a chill run down his spine. The animal stood perfectly still, allowing Sam to touch its face, but its eyes never left the boy. There was an intensity there, an awareness that seemed almost calculated. The donkey had been completely unresponsive for 3 days. No sounds, no movement, barely eating. The local veterinarian had examined it and found nothing wrong. "Healthy as any animal I've seen," Doc Miller had said, scratching his head. "Sometimes they just need time to adjust." But this wasn't adjustment. This was something else entirely. Sam giggled softly, a rare sound that always made Wade's heart swell. His son spoke few words, communicated mostly through gestures and expressions, but with the donkey he seemed different, more focused, more present. The animal suddenly lifted its head, ears swiveling toward the eastern pasture. Wade followed its gaze but saw nothing, just empty grassland stretching toward the horizon. Yet the donkey remained alert, as if listening to something only it could hear. Then Sam turned in the same direction, his face taking on that same focused expression. Father and son had lived alone on this ranch for 8 years, and Wade knew every one of Sam's behaviors, every subtle change in his demeanor. But this was new. The donkey took another step forward, positioning itself between Sam and whatever had caught its attention in the distance. The boy placed both hands on the animal's neck, and for a moment, they stood like that, perfectly still, perfectly synchronized. Wade felt his mouth go dry. In 12 years of raising Sam, he'd never seen his son connect with anything, or anyone like this, and the donkey's behavior defied every explanation he could think of. What had the trader really sold him? And why did he have the growing feeling that this quiet animal was far more than it appeared to be? The hoofbeats grew louder, grew, rhythmic and urgent against the hard ground. Wade counted at least 2 horses, maybe 3, approaching from the eastern pasture where the donkey and Sam continued to stare with that unnerving focus. "Sam, come away from the fence," Wade called, but his son remained motionless, one hand resting on the donkey's neck. The animal hadn't moved either, positioned like a barrier between the boy and whatever was coming. Wade grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the barn wall. Not to threaten, but these isolated ranches attracted all kinds: drifters, cattle thieves, men running from the law. A father learned to be cautious, especially when protecting a child who couldn't fully understand danger. The first rider crested the small hill that bordered Wade's property. A woman, riding hard on a chestnut mare, her dark hair streaming behind her. Behind her came 2 men, their horses lathered with sweat as if they'd been riding through the night. The donkey made a sound Wade had never heard before. Low, almost like a growl. Sam looked up at his father, brown eyes wide with concern, then back toward the approaching riders. The woman pulled up her horse 30 feet from the corral, close enough to talk but maintaining a respectful distance. Her clothes were dusty from travel, but Wade noticed the quality of her saddle, the well-maintained rifle in her scabbard. These weren't drifters. "Morning," she called out, her voice carrying authority despite her obvious exhaustion. "I'm looking for a man who sold you an animal recently." Gray donkey, quiet disposition. Wade's grip tightened on his rifle. "Who's asking?" The woman glanced at the 2 men behind her, then back at Wade. "Someone who needs to find that animal before others do." Her eyes moved to the donkey, and Wade saw recognition flash across her face. "Before people get hurt." The donkey pressed closer to Sam, and Wade noticed his son's breathing had changed. Shorter, more anxious. Sam understood tension even when he couldn't follow the words. "Ma'am, I bought that animal fair and legal from a traveling trader," Wade said carefully. "Don't see how that concerns anyone else." One of the men behind her spoke up. "The trader you dealt with stole that donkey from our facility. We've been tracking him for 2 weeks. Facility. The word hit Wade like a punch to the gut. What kind of facility keeps donkeys? And why would someone steal one? The woman raised her hand, silencing her companion. Mr. Langston, isn't it? I need you to understand something. That animal isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. Not to you or your boy directly, but to the people who are coming to take it back. As if summoned by her words, another set of hoofbeats echoed from the west. Different rhythm, heavier horses. The donkey's ears swiveled toward the new sound, and Sam made a soft whimpering noise. Wade felt his world tilting sideways. Who else is coming? The second group of riders appeared from the west. 3 men on dark horses moving with military precision. The woman in front of Wade's corral tensed immediately, her hand dropping to her rifle. They found us, one of her companions muttered, his voice tight with concern. Wade felt Sam press against his leg, seeking comfort. The donkey moved even closer to the boy, its entire body coiled with tension as it watched the approaching horseman. Ma'am, Wade said quietly, I need to know what's happening here. You're telling me people are going to get hurt over a donkey? The woman's eyes never left the Western riders. That animal was bred in a government facility for specific traits: enhanced senses, problem-solving abilities, extreme loyalty to handlers. The project was shut down, but certain parties want to continue the research. Wade's stomach clenched. Enhanced senses. That would explain how the donkey had detected the first group long before Wade could see or hear them. And these men coming now? Wade nodded toward the Western riders. Private contractors. They don't care about legal ownership or your boy's safety. The woman finally looked at him directly. They'll take that animal by any means necessary. The donkey made that low growling sound again, and Sam whimpered softly. Wade put a protective hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the boy tremble. The 3 riders pulled up 50 yards away, close enough to make their presence known, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. The lead rider was older, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders. Agent Carter, the man called out, his voice carrying across the distance. You're interfering with official business. The woman, Agent Carter, straightened in her saddle. This is my jurisdiction, Colonel. That animal was stolen from our facility. Your facility was closed, Agent. New management has taken over. The Colonel's tone was cold, dismissive. Stand aside. Wade felt everything inside him go cold. These people were talking about Sam's donkey, as if it were property to be seized, with no consideration for his son's feelings or needs. Sam looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, and Wade saw fear there for the first time. The boy might not understand the full conversation, but he understood that strangers wanted to take away his new friend. The donkey seemed to sense Sam's distress. It moved between the boy and both groups of riders, its head lowered, ears pinned back in a way that made it look far more formidable than Wade had ever imagined. Nobody's taking anything from my property, Wade said, his voice carrying clearly across the space between them. He raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone but making his position clear. The Colonel smiled, a cold expression that made Wade's skin crawl. Mr. Langston, you don't understand the forces you're dealing with. But as if responding to some signal only it could perceive, the donkey suddenly moved. Not toward the riders, but deeper into the corral, nudging Sam toward the back of the enclosure. Something was about to happen, and somehow the animal knew it first. The shot came from behind the barn, a sharp crack that split the morning air. Wade spun around, his heart hammering, as a 4th rider emerged from the trees where he'd been hiding. The man held a rifle trained on Agent Carter. Nobody moves, the newcomer called out. He was young, maybe 25, with the desperate look of someone who'd been pushed too far. I'm taking that donkey, and anyone who tries to stop me is going to regret it. Wade felt Sam grab his leg, the boy's fingers digging into his pants. The donkey had somehow positioned itself in the corner of the corral, where it could see all the riders while keeping Sam behind the fence rails. Agent Carter's voice was steady despite the rifle pointed at her. Stand down, Martinez. You're outnumbered and outgunned. That animal is my ticket out of this mess. Martinez shot back. I'm the one who stole it from your precious facility. I'm the one who's been running for 3 weeks, and I'm not leaving without it. The Colonel laughed, a harsh sound that made Wade's skin crawl. You think we'd let a deserter like you profit from government property? That donkey goes back to our research facility, where it belongs. Wade's mind raced. Martinez was the trader who'd sold him the donkey, except he hadn't been a legitimate trader at all. He'd been a thief, and now Wade's ranch had become the center of a 3-way standoff. Sam, Wade whispered, crouching down to his son's eye level, I need you to walk slowly to the house. Stay low. Stay quiet. Sam's brown eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded. The boy understood danger even when he couldn't follow all the words being spoken around him. But when Sam started to move, the donkey made a sound. Not quite a bray, more like a warning call. The animal's ears swiveled toward the eastern pasture, the same direction it had been watching all morning. Wade followed its gaze and felt his blood turn to ice. More riders were approaching. At least 6, moving in formation like a military unit. Reinforcements, Agent Carter muttered, but Wade could tell she wasn't sure whose side they were on. Martinez was getting more agitated by the second. I didn't survive 3 weeks of running just to get caught in a crossfire. That donkey is coming with me, and anyone who tries to stop me won't have to, Wade interrupted, his voice carrying more authority than he felt. Because none of you are taking anything from my property while my son is in danger. He raised his rifle, not pointing it at any specific person, but making his intentions clear. I don't care about your government facilities or your research projects. I care about that boy, and he's attached to that animal. So here's what's going to happen. Wade's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to continue. You're all going to lower your weapons, mount your horses, and ride away from my ranch. The donkey stays here. The colonel's cold smile widened. Mr. Langston, you're making a very dangerous mistake. But before anyone could respond, the approaching riders crested the hill. Wade counted 8 men, not 6, all carrying rifles and moving with the precision of trained soldiers. And they weren't wearing any uniform Wade recognized. The new riders spread out in a wide semicircle, their rifles already drawn. Wade's heart sank as he realized these weren't government agents or military personnel. These men had the hard look of hired guns, mercenaries who solved problems with bullets. Agent Carter cursed under her breath. Foreign contractors, she said quietly. Someone else wants that donkey bad enough to hire professionals. Wade felt the world spinning out of control. How had buying a simple animal for his son turned into this nightmare? Sam was still pressed against his leg, trembling now, and the donkey had moved to the corner of the corral closest to the boy. The lead mercenary called out in accented English, "Gentlemen, lady, we suggest you all step away from the animal. Our employer has made a very generous offer for its return." "Like hell," Martinez snarled, swinging his rifle toward the new arrivals. "I've got first claim on that donkey." Wade saw the situation about to explode into gunfire with his son caught in the middle. Every instinct screamed at him to grab Sam and run for the house, but they'd never make it across the open ground. Then the donkey did something unexpected. It moved to the gate of the corral and pushed against it with its shoulder. The latch, which Wade had left unfastened in his hurry to get his rifle, swung open. "No!" Wade called out, afraid the animal would bolt and leave Sam even more vulnerable. But the donkey didn't run. Instead, it positioned itself directly between Sam and all the armed riders, standing in the open space like a living shield. Sam made a soft sound and reached out to touch the animal's flank. The donkey remained perfectly still, alert, but calm, as if the boy's touch gave it strength. Agent Carter looked at Wade with something like respect. "Your son has an unusual connection with that animal. They understand each other," Wade said simply. "Sam doesn't need words to communicate, and apparently neither does the donkey." The colonel was growing impatient. "Enough of this sentiment. That animal represents years of research and development. It doesn't belong to a rancher and his boy." But before anyone could move, Wade heard something that made his blood run cold. Sam was humming, that low, soft sound he made when he was concentrating hard on something, and the donkey's ears were twitching, swiveling back and forth as if listening to signals only it could hear. Suddenly, the animal's entire posture changed. Its head snapped up, looking toward the southern ridge where Wade's property bordered the river. Agent Carter followed the donkey's gaze and went pale. "How many people know about this animal?" Martinez was starting to panic. "I only told one buyer about it, some foreign collector who said he'd pay triple what it was worth." The mercenary leader smiled grimly. "Our employer doesn't like competition." As if summoned by his words, rifle shots echoed from the southern ridge. Not random shooting, organized, disciplined fire. Someone else was coming, and they weren't planning to negotiate. Wade looked down at Sam, who was staring up at him with complete trust, then at the donkey that had somehow become his son's protector in the span of a few hours. He made a decision that would change everything. "Sam," he said quietly, "hold on to that donkey's mane. We're going for a ride." Wade lifted Sam onto the donkey's back in one swift motion. The animal stood perfectly still, as if it understood the gravity of their situation. Sam gripped the donkey's mane with both hands, his brown eyes wide but trusting. "Hold on tight," Wade whispered, grabbing the donkey's halter. He'd grown up on this ranch, knew every trail and hiding spot for miles. If they could reach the canyon behind the north pasture, they'd have cover and multiple escape routes. The gunfire from the south was getting closer. Through the trees, Wade could see muzzle flashes and hear men shouting orders. Whatever group was approaching wasn't interested in negotiation. Agent Carter called out as Wade led the donkey away from the corral. "Langston, you can't protect them by running. These people won't stop." "Maybe not," Wade replied without turning around. "But I won't let my son get caught in a firefight either." The donkey seemed to understand their urgency. It moved with purpose, its hooves finding sure footing on the rocky ground as they headed toward the tree line. Sam sat quietly on its back, occasionally patting the animal's neck in a gesture of encouragement. Behind them, Wade heard the first exchange of gunfire. Sharp cracks echoed across the ranch as different groups began shooting at each other. The colonel's voice cut through the chaos, barking orders to his men. Wade quickened his pace, pulling the donkey toward the narrow path that led up into the rocky canyon. The animal's breathing was steady, controlled, as if it had been trained for situations like this. "Dad," Sam said softly, one of the few words he spoke regularly. Wade looked up to see his son pointing ahead, toward a cluster of boulders that would provide cover. "Good eyes, son," Wade said, feeling a surge of pride. Sam might communicate differently than others, but his awareness of their surroundings was sharp. They reached the boulder field just as Wade heard hoofbeats behind them. Someone was following, probably more than one rider. The donkey's ears swiveled backward, and it guided them between two large rocks that formed a natural hiding place. Wade pressed his back against the cold stone, catching his breath. Sam remained calm on the donkey's back, one hand still tangled in its mane. The animal stood motionless, but Wade could see its nostrils flaring as it tested the air. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Wade heard voices, low, urgent conversation in what sounded like a foreign language. The mercenaries had followed their trail. Sam looked down at Wade with questioning eyes. The boy could sense danger even when he couldn't identify its source. Wade put a finger to his lips, and Sam nodded, understanding the need for silence. The donkey's behavior was remarkable. Despite the chaos behind them and the threat nearby, it remained perfectly calm, as if drawing strength from Sam's presence. Wade had never seen an animal respond to his son with such intuitive understanding, but their hiding spot wouldn't conceal them for long. Soon, someone would think to check the canyon, and then they'd be trapped with nowhere to run. Wade looked at the steep trail that led deeper into the rocks. It was dangerous, especially with Sam riding, but it might be their only chance. The steep trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for the donkey's hooves. Wade led them higher into the canyon, knowing that each step took them further from safety, but also deeper into terrain where horses couldn't follow easily. Sam sat perfectly balanced on the donkey's back, moving with the animal's rhythm as if they'd been partners for years instead of hours. The donkey picked its way carefully over loose rocks and narrow ledges, never missing a step. Below them, Wade could hear the mercenaries searching through the boulder field. Their voices echoed off the canyon walls, frustrated and increasingly urgent. Someone was shouting orders in that foreign language, and Wade caught enough tone to know they were getting angry. "We can't stay here," Wade muttered to himself. The canyon had several exits, but they all led to open country where they'd be visible for miles. What he needed was a place to hide until nightfall. Then he remembered the old mining cave his grandfather had shown him as a boy. It was hidden behind a waterfall about half a mile deeper into the canyon. The entrance was narrow, difficult to spot unless you knew exactly where to look. Sam made a soft sound and pointed ahead. Wade followed his son's gaze and saw what had caught the boy's attention. The donkey was already heading in the direction of the cave, as if it somehow knew where they needed to go. "Smart animal," Wade whispered, then caught himself. How could the donkey know about a cave it had never seen, unless its enhanced senses could detect things like airflow or humidity that indicated a hidden space? The sound of the waterfall grew louder as they climbed. Wade's legs burned from the exertion, but the donkey showed no signs of fatigue. Whatever training it had received in that government facility had prepared it for situations like this. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers were getting fainter. The mercenaries had either given up searching the canyon or had gone back to report to their employer. Wade hoped it was the former, but he suspected it was the latter. They reached the waterfall just as the sun reached its peak overhead. The narrow entrance to the cave was exactly where Wade remembered it, hidden behind the curtain of falling water. The donkey stepped through the spray without hesitation, as if it had been expecting to find shelter here. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp. Wade helped Sam down from the donkey's back, and the boy immediately sat beside the animal, leaning against its flank. The donkey lowered its head, allowing Sam to stroke its muzzle. "We'll rest here until dark," Wade said, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. Sam, who might not fully understand, or the donkey, which seemed to understand everything. But as Wade settled against the cave wall, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Hoofbeats again, but not from the direction they'd come. These were approaching from the opposite end of the canyon. Someone else knew about the cave, and they were coming fast. The donkey's ears pricked up, and it moved protectively in front of Sam. Wade grabbed his rifle and moved to the cave entrance, trying to see through the waterfall. A single rider was approaching, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Wade's heart hammered as he recognized the horse. It was Agent Carter, and she was alone. But why had she come after them? And how had she known where to find them? Wade kept his rifle trained on the cave entrance. As Agent Carter dismounted near the waterfall, she held her hands visible, empty, as she approached through the spray. "I'm alone," she called out, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. "And I'm here to help." "Help how?" Wade replied, not lowering his weapon. "By taking the donkey back to your facility?" Agent Carter stepped into the cave, water dripping from her clothes. When she saw Sam sitting beside the donkey, her expression softened. "That facility was shut down for a reason, Mr. Langston. The research was going too far." Wade noticed how the donkey remained calm in her presence, unlike its reaction to the colonel and the mercenaries. Sam looked up at the agent with curious eyes, not afraid. "What kind of research?" Wade asked. "Intelligence enhancement through selective breeding and intensive training. That donkey is the last successful result of a 3-year program." Carter sat on a rock outcropping, careful to move slowly. The goal was to create animals that could serve as early warning systems for military units. Wade felt pieces clicking into place. Enhanced senses. Extraordinary hearing, smell, and pattern recognition. The ability to detect approaching threats long before humans could perceive them. Carter gestured toward the donkey. "But the program was terminated when we realized we'd created something more than we intended." "What do you mean?" "Emotional intelligence. Deep capacity for bonding with specific handlers. The animals became protective, almost to the point of—" Carter paused, searching for the right words. "They would sacrifice themselves to protect the person they'd bonded with." Wade looked at Sam, who was stroking the donkey's neck. The animal's eyes were half closed with contentment, but its ears remained alert to every sound from outside the cave. "Why was the program shut down?" "Because we realized we were creating weapons out of innocent animals." The colonel disagreed. He thought the emotional bonding made them more valuable, not less. Carter's voice hardened. "He's been trying to restart the program with private funding." The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the canyon. Carter stood quickly, moving to the cave entrance to listen. "The mercenaries and the colonel's men are fighting each other," she said. "Martinez probably got caught in the crossfire." Wade felt a chill. "And when they're done fighting, the survivors will come looking for us." Carter turned back to Wade and Sam. "But I have a solution." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out an official-looking document. Transfer of ownership. Legal, binding, and backdated to before the animal was stolen. Wade stared at the papers. "You're giving us the donkey?" "The program is dead, Mr. Langston. That animal deserves better than being a research subject." Carter looked at Sam, who was listening intently, despite probably not understanding all the words. "And your son has given it something we never could." "What's that?" "A home." But even as she spoke, they heard hoofbeats approaching the waterfall again. Multiple riders this time, moving fast. Carter cursed under her breath. "They found us." The approaching riders wore different uniforms than any of the previous groups. Wade counted 6 men in federal marshal badges, riding in tight formation toward the waterfall. Agent Carter smiled grimly. "I called for backup 3 hours ago. While everyone was fighting over your donkey, federal authorities were surrounding the area." Wade heard shouts echoing from the main canyon, orders being given, men surrendering. The gunfire had stopped completely. "Marshal Thompson," Carter called out as the lead rider approached. "Situation contained?" The marshal nodded, dismounting near the cave entrance. Colonel Brennan and his men are in custody. The foreign contractors surrendered when they realized they were outnumbered. Martinez, he paused, didn't make it out of the crossfire. Wade felt his legs go weak with relief. Sam looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, and Wade reached down to ruffle his son's hair. "What about the donkey?" Wade asked. Agent Carter handed him the transfer documents. "Legally yours as of this morning. The federal government no longer has any claim to the animal." Marshal Thompson studied the papers briefly, then nodded. "Everything appears to be in order." He looked at Sam, who was still sitting beside the donkey, and his expression softened. "Boy seems attached to that animal." "They understand each other," Wade said simply. The marshal smiled. "Sometimes that's all that matters." As they prepared to leave the cave, Wade watched Sam stand and wrap his arms around the donkey's neck. The animal lowered its head, allowing the boy to hug it properly. For the first time in hours, Wade felt something like peace. Agent Carter mounted her horse as they emerged into the sunlight. "Mr. Langston, that animal will always have enhanced senses. It might react to things you can't see or hear. I'll keep that in mind. And if you ever have problems with it, or if Sam needs anything," she handed him a card, "call me." Wade pocketed the card, knowing he probably wouldn't need it. Sam and the donkey had formed a bond that went deeper than training or enhancement. They'd found something in each other that couldn't be artificially created. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Sam rode on the donkey's back, completely relaxed now that the danger had passed. Wade walked alongside them, occasionally glancing at his son's face to see the contentment there. When they reached the corral, Sam slid down from the donkey's back and immediately began leading it toward the water trough. The animal followed willingly, no longer the silent, unresponsive creature Wade had bought just days before. As evening approached, Wade sat on the porch steps, watching Sam brush the donkey's coat with gentle strokes. The boy was humming softly, that same sound he made when he was perfectly happy. Wade thought about the events of the past few days, how a simple purchase had turned into a life-threatening adventure. But looking at Sam now, seeing the joy on his son's face, Wade knew it had been worth every moment of terror. The donkey might have enhanced senses, might be able to detect danger before it arrived. But what it had given Sam was something far more valuable: companionship, purpose, and a friend who understood him completely. Wade smiled as Sam patted the donkey's neck and whispered something only the animal could hear. Whatever the boy had said, the donkey's ears twitched in what looked almost like a nod. They were home, they were safe, and they were finally complete. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where courage and family bonds face impossible challenges in the American frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.
He should have frozen. He should have given up. But when they found him, buried in snow, body trembling, one paw draped over something small, they realized this was no ordinary dog. This was a soldier without a uniform. A German shepherd who hadn't eaten in days, who bled beneath his fur, but who refused to move, because under his chest a tiny life still breathed. And when they saw what he was protecting, they screamed. What follows is a story of loyalty, survival, and the kind of love that makes angels weep. Before we begin, tell us where in the world you're watching from. If you believe that even in the coldest places, warmth can be found in the heart of a dog. Hit that subscribe button, share this story, and let's remind the world what real courage looks like. Big Sky, Montana. Elevation 7,218 feet. Temperature 8 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The storm had arrived 2 days early, roaring over the mountain range like a freight train full of ice. The narrow service road that wound through Gallatin Canyon was now barely visible beneath 6 inches of fresh powder, with more falling every minute. Trees creaked beneath the weight of snow. The world was white, and silence reigned, until the howl. It was not the kind of howl that called for company. It was fractured, low, the kind that scratched at the chest before it made it to the air. Deputy Ranger Scott Dalton pulled the truck to a stop, killing the engine. At 42, Dalton was broad-shouldered and square-jawed, the kind of man who carried the storm in his bones and never said much unless it mattered. His gray fleece jacket bore the county wildlife emblem, faded from years of patrol. He leaned forward in the driver's seat, squinting into the storm. Beside him, slouched in the passenger seat, sat Elijah Eli Boone, a wildlife technician in his late 20s with a wiry build, shaggy blonde hair, and restless hands that tapped against his thermos. He'd grown up on a horse ranch and could read animal tracks like lines in a book. Though smart and sharp-eyed, Eli was still considered green by Dalton standards. He was also the first to speak. "That wasn't a coyote," he said, straightening up. Dalton grunted. "Number that was something else." They followed the sound, trudging off-road with snowshoes, flashlights slicing through the swirling white. The wind tore at their coats, howled through the pines, but the sound came again, closer this time. It was Eli who spotted the shape first, a dark mound near the base of a ridge, partially buried. "There," he said, and began moving faster. When they reached it, the sight stopped them both. A dog, large German shepherd, body curled tightly, half buried in drift. One paw stretched protectively over a smaller shape nestled against its chest. The big dog's fur was matted with ice, breath shallow and slow, eyes half-lidded but alert. When Dalton reached forward, the dog let out a low, ragged growl, not of aggression, but of desperation. The smaller shape moved. A pup, perhaps 4 or 5 weeks old, trembling under the shield of the older dog's body. Its fur was reddish-brown, the kind that might belong to a shepherd mix. It whimpered softly, then went still again. Dalton crouched, his voice quiet. "Easy now, boy. We're not going to hurt you." He removed his glove and slowly reached out. The big shepherd made no move to bite, only flicked his ear in recognition of the gesture. "Jesus," Eli whispered. "He's been lying like that for days, hasn't he?" "Looks that way." They didn't dare move them yet. First, warmth. Eli ran back to the truck while Dalton stayed behind, slowly brushing away the snow from around the dogs. The storm swirled higher up the ridge, wind whipping Dalton's coat and stinging his cheeks. The German shepherd's name was unknown, but something in his eyes said he knew them, not as men, but as rescue. Still, he didn't shift an inch, even as warmth approached. Eli returned with an insulated thermal blanket and the portable heat mat they kept in the truck. "We'll have to load them slow," he said, "one at a time." "Not gonna work," Dalton said, his eyes locked with the dog's. "He won't leave the pup, not until it's safe." Eli hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Then we carry them together." It was a tight fit in the back of the truck. They converted the bed into a temporary recovery space, lined it with blankets, activated the heat mat, and placed both dogs in the corner. The shepherd's body curled around the pup again almost instinctively. He let out a soft, exhausted sigh. Dalton closed the truck bed and thumped the roof. "Let's move." By the time they reached the county wildlife station on the edge of town, the snow had thickened into a near whiteout. Waiting in the small garage bay, already prepped thanks to the radio call, was Dr. Emily Hayes. 37 years old, tall and willow-thin, with deep brown eyes and a streak of white hair running through her auburn ponytail. Her heavy green jacket was patched at the elbows, and her gloved hands moved with clinical calm. Emily had once led a wildlife rescue unit in Arizona before returning to her hometown to care for her ailing father. Since his death 2 winters ago, she'd stayed, finding solace in the quiet of the mountains and the company of the wounded. When she saw the shepherd, her breath caught. "Oh my God!" She crouched immediately, running her hand gently over his head. He's guarding him, still. Dalton nodded, wouldn't move, even as he froze. They transferred both dogs to the exam room inside. Emily worked fast, placing warming pads under the pup and checking its vitals. Male, she said, 5 weeks, dehydrated, borderline hypothermic, no visible fractures, no ID tag. Her assistant, Raymond Lee, a soft-spoken college student with wide eyes and a round face, gently cleaned the shepherd's paws. He's got torn pads, bruised ribs, and old lacerations, but this isn't recent. Emily's hand froze on the dog's neck. Wait, there's something under his collar. She tugged gently and found it, a tiny strip of metal, barely legible. 2 words etched into it, protect him. No one spoke. Eli finally broke the silence. So, what now? Emily looked down at the shepherd, who was watching her with unwavering amber eyes. She touched his cheek. Now, we listen to what he's been trying to tell us. The snow had thickened, turning from flurries into an unrelenting cascade of white. By the time Deputy Dalton, Eli, and Emily had loaded both dogs into the truck bed, visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet. The road that led back to town, already treacherous, was now buried under drifts and black ice. Even with chains on the tires, Dalton wasn't willing to risk the winding switchbacks that curled down the canyon in this storm. "We're not going anywhere tonight," he said flatly, voice muffled through his scarf. Emily looked from the dashboard GPS to the icy void outside the windshield. "There's a service cabin about a mile up. It's off-grid, but it's stocked. It'll be safer than trying to push through." They agreed without further debate. Dalton eased the truck forward tires, crunching through snow, while the heater blasted hot air into the cab. In the back, wrapped in thermal blankets, Ranger and the pup lay side by side on the portable warming mat. The older dog had not moved since being placed there. He only opened his eyes briefly whenever the wind shook the truck frame as if assessing danger. The pup, smaller than a farmhouse cat, had curled tightly into his chest. When they reached the ranger cabin, the world outside had dimmed to a ghostly blue. The wind screamed across the windows as Dalton reversed the truck into the side lean-to. The cabin was a single-story wood structure with a slanted tin roof walls coated in decades of pine sap and wind. The chimney was long since abandoned, but a solar-powered battery system kept an emergency light alive above the door. Inside, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Eli rushed to plug in the backup heater while Dalton hauled in supplies from the truck. Emily followed with the crate holding the 2 dogs, gently placing it near the heater's coil. "I'll prep the portable IV for fluids," she said, unzipping her med pack. Her hands moved automatically, but her eyes never left the shepherd. He's still alert, but barely. Eli hunched over the cabin's storage bin, produced a dented thermos and several heating packs. Still nothing on the radio. No chance of calling for evac tonight. Emily knelt by the pup. She gently lifted its head, examining its gums, then ran her hand along its spine. Dehydrated, but not starving. Someone was feeding him, at least until recently. She paused. "Wait." What Eli came over. Emily lifted the pup again and gently turned its side toward the lantern light. Just beneath the left foreleg, hidden under thick fur, a faint scar. Not from an accident, clean surgical. Her brows knit as she reached into her pocket and retrieved a penlight. "I've seen this before," she murmured. Dalton raised his head, from where Emily exhaled slowly. "From here. This scar. I did this." She stood, walking to her vet bag and pulling out a weathered leather journal. She flipped through pages lined with case notes, sketches, and tiny paw print stamps. Finally, she landed on a page dated 7 weeks ago, Shepherd Mix Puppy, male, estimated 3 weeks old, treated for mild dehydration and flea dermatitis. No tag, brought in anonymously, left overnight in crate. But there's no record of discharge, Dalton noted. "Exactly," Emily said. Someone took him without telling me. Someone who didn't want paperwork. Eli frowned. You think it was stolen? Maybe. Or maybe someone didn't want to leave a trace. But if this is the same pup, then that dog, she gestured to Ranger, didn't just find him. He's been protecting him. For weeks. They fell silent for a moment. Outside, the wind slammed against the walls as if trying to get in. Ranger stirred slightly. His breath fogged in the cold, but he didn't shift position. The pup let out a small, sharp whine, and Emily instinctively reached to comfort it. That engraving on the collar, Eli said suddenly. Protect him. Could it be from whoever dropped the pup off? Emily shook her head. No tag, no note. But maybe they meant it for Ranger. Maybe he's more than just a dog. Maybe he was trained to protect something precious. Dalton returned from checking the door. Well, he succeeded. Pup's still alive. Barely. Emily looked back at the German Shepherd. Even from the corner with the heater humming, she could see his exhaustion. But it was the kind of weariness she knew well, the kind that didn't come from just cold or hunger, but from choosing to stay awake long past your limits. Choosing to guard something instead of giving in. She moved to the edge of the crate and placed a bowl of warm glucose solution inside. Let's see if you'll take this big guy. Ranger didn't move at first. Then slowly, one ear flicked. He lifted his head just enough to sniff the bowl. A few seconds passed. Then his tongue dipped in once, twice. Enough to register interest. He's not out of the woods, she said softly. But that's something. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and they resigned themselves to a night in the cabin. Ranger drank a bit more. The pup began twitching gently in sleep. And Emily, seated in a folding chair near the crate, finally allowed herself to rest her back against the wall. She watched them, two survivors bound together by something no one yet understood. The blizzard had not relented by morning. Dawn brought no light, only a diluted grayness that blurred the lines between forest and sky. Inside the ranger cabin, the generator hummed softly while a makeshift space heater sputtered heat across the wooden floor. Ranger lay still, curled around the puppy, whose belly now rose and fell with steadier rhythm. Eli slept with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders in the corner while Dalton sipped weak coffee near the window, watching ice crawl across the panes. Emily sat beside the crate, eyes fixed on the German Shepherd, noting the way his breathing had shifted, less labored, but far from strong. When she reached in to check his temperature again, her fingers brushed against a small patch of fur on his flank and felt the raised ridge beneath. A scar newer than the others. She leaned in, parting the matted hair. The wound was nearly healed, but jagged with sutures that didn't look veterinary. More like field stitching, not by her hand or anyone trained. Dalton, she said without looking up. Come see this. He approached silently. She pressed his hand to the same spot. That's no accident. Dalton's brow furrowed. Knife or wire? Maybe barbed. But it's been sewn up. Someone cared enough to close it, but not enough to bring him in. As she spoke, Ranger stirred slightly, his ears twitching. His eyes, amber and unreadable, opened just enough to meet hers. Then softly he growled. Not at her. At something else. At the window. Dalton instinctively turned. What's out there? The growl subsided, but Ranger didn't break his stare. His body tensed as though expecting something or someone. Emily moved to the window, brushing condensation from the glass. Snow still fell heavily, but in the clearing about 20 feet from the cabin she saw something faint. A dark line too straight to be natural. Dalton grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. Eli followed, wiping the sleep from his eyes. They found it quickly, a trail of frozen blood. Thin, brittle, already fading beneath new snow, but unmistakable. It led into the trees toward the ridge. Could be from Ranger Eli offered. Emily shook her head. No, this isn't old enough. He's been with us since last night. This is fresh." Dalton exchanged a look with her. "We follow it, just far enough to know where it goes." They geared up and left Ranger and the pup in the cabin, barricading the door and leaving Emily's number scrawled on the inside panel in case someone arrived. The wind bit at their cheeks as they followed the trail weaving between pines heavy with snow. The blood dots grew more spaced out, but they held. It wasn't until they reached a patch of frozen brush beneath a leaning fir that they saw it clearly. The snow had been disturbed, scattered as if something had collapsed or thrashed. There was a broken branch nearby, and under it, partially buried in ice, they found fur. Black, coarse, not from a deer or wolf, dog hair. Dalton knelt, brushing frost away. Another patch of blood and something else shredded fabric. A piece of a jacket sleeve. "Someone was here," he muttered. "And hurt." Eli scanned the trees. But why leave? And where did they go? Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Signal had returned faintly. One missed call. No ID. A moment later, it rang again. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, mid-range, unfamiliar. Calm, but strained. "You have them, don't you?" Emily's hand tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" "The black dog. The small brown one." "You have them." Her voice dropped. "Who are you?" "I'm the one who lost them," the man said. "And now I want them back." Emily signaled to Dalton, who immediately motioned for Eli to silence. "If you care about them, tell me who you are. Come forward." But the line went dead. No sound, no click, just silence. They returned to the cabin with increased urgency. Ranger had risen slightly when they arrived, head lifted, growling low and steady. The pup whimpered but stayed curled close. "We're not alone out here," Dalton said. Eli glanced toward the ridge. "You think someone's watching us? I think someone's been watching for a while." Emily replayed the words in her head. The caller had known what the dogs looked like, too detailed for coincidence. And if he had access to their location, either he had been nearby or he was part of something larger. Back in the cabin, Emily pulled a dog brush from her kit and began gently cleaning the pup's fur. Underneath the dirt, small burrs and crusted blood, the pup's coat was soft and even. Well groomed once. She looked at Ranger again. "You didn't just stumble across him," she said aloud. "You were assigned to him, or trained for him. That's what this is, isn't it?" The shepherd's gaze didn't leave her. Then he did something that stopped them all. He rose, shakily legs trembling, but he stood, still weak, but driven by something deeper than strength. He turned toward the cabin door and stared. Dalton stepped forward. "You want us to follow Ranger?" Let out a quiet whine. Then he pawed at the door once, just once. The storm had finally broken. By late morning, the skies had calmed into a pale, heavy gray, and the snow fell soft, no longer blinding. Ranger stood near the cabin door, his body still unsteady, but his posture firm, watchful. When Dalton opened the door, the shepherd took one slow step forward onto the ice-packed porch, sniffed the air, and looked back at them, waiting. They followed him in silence, staying close and keeping their pace slow for his sake. The blood trail had faded under the new snow, but Ranger seemed to remember the direction, veering off the main path and down an overgrown service trail that hadn't been cleared in years. The terrain sloped downward into a shallow ravine where the skeletal remains of a split-rail fence emerged from the white, guiding them toward something unnatural. Rusted metal, broken cinder blocks, and what looked like the bones of a forgotten outpost. It had once been a compound, a cluster of prefabricated buildings now sunken into the ground, their roofs bowed under the weight of snow and time. One structure still bore a crooked sign, its letters faded but legible Sable Ridge Wildlife Care Center. Dalton frowned. That place was shut down 5 years ago. Emily nodded grimly. For animal welfare violations. We used to send rescues here. Until the audit. As they moved closer, Eli broke off toward a half-collapsed kennel run on the south side. The wire mesh had been torn outward like something had forced its way through from inside. This wasn't age or weather, he said. Something fought to get out. Inside the nearest structure, the smell hit first mildew urine, the long decayed scent of neglect. The walls were stained, and the light that filtered through the broken windows was weak and cold. They stepped cautiously over piles of newspaper empty feed bags, shattered crates. Emily spotted something under a toppled shelf, a crumpled fleece blanket. She knelt, lifting it gently, and found the corner stained deep red. A familiar smell clung to it, coppery sharp and distinctly canine. Ranger's scent, she murmured. Dalton crouched beside her. You sure? She nodded. He bled here. Ranger himself stood frozen just beyond the threshold ears, backtail still breathing heavy. He didn't enter. Instead, he whined a low, almost pained sound and turned his head away. Eli returned with a small bundle in his hands, a collar torn at the buckle with a bent ID tag barely hanging on. There's a name, he said, squinting. Milo. Emily took the tag and turned it over. The backside had a clinic code etched into it, her clinic. This dog was registered through me, but I never saw this collar. I never treated a Milo. They searched deeper into the compound, pushing through moldy files and splintered furniture until they reached what had once been the main office. The room was windowless, but a filing cabinet in the back had been forced open. Most of the folders were gone, burned or removed, but one had slipped behind the cabinet, half crushed and damp. Emily pulled it free and flipped through the brittle pages. Intake logs, she said, scanning. But no discharge records. Look at this. These dogs were signed and assigned temporary ID codes and then nothing. No transfers, no adoptions, no deaths reported. Dalton's face darkened. So, where did they go? As if answering the question, Ranger stepped forward into the room and walked slowly to the far corner. There, under a thin layer of frost, was a dented stainless steel dog bowl. He nudged it once with his snout, then backed away and sat down, staring at them. Eli crouched, brushing snow aside, revealing more of the floor, a series of parallel scratch marks, long and erratic, like claws scrabbling for escape. This isn't a shelter, Emily said quietly. It was a warehouse. Dalton straightened. And Ranger was here. They emerged from the building and continued their sweep of the grounds. Toward the edge of the property past the last line of collapsed fencing, Eli called out again. Over here. They joined him at the base of a tree where he held up a metal hook, half buried in the dirt attached to a frayed rope. Nearby, an old transport cage lay on its side, broken open, its hinges splintered. There was a struggle, Eli said, and someone didn't want them found. Emily's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text message, this time from an unknown number. Stay out of this. You don't know what you're walking into. She showed the message to Dalton. He stared at the phone, jaw tightening. Looks like someone's afraid we'll find the rest. In the truck, Emily sat beside Ranger, her hand resting gently on his back. You escaped, she said softly. You saved the puppy. You brought us here. The shepherd didn't move, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders, the readiness, the burden. He was trained, she added, thinking aloud. Not just a rescue dog, a therapy dog, maybe even more. That's why he was at that compound. Eli turned around from the front seat. How do you know? Emily reached into her bag and produced an old laminated flyer creased and folded from years in her field kit. On the front was a photo, a German shepherd in a blue vest beside a young boy in a wheelchair. The caption read, Therapy Partners Bridging Hope. She placed the flyer beside Ranger. That's you, isn't it? The dog closed his eyes and for the first time let out a sound, not a growl or whine, but a breath. Long, steady, like release. The wind had gone quiet again, leaving the forest still and heavy. Tree branches sagged under new snow, and every breath the team took rose in clouds. Emily walked slightly ahead of the others, her boots crunching softly as they moved downhill from the ruins of Sable Ridge. Ranger walked beside her, limping but insistent. He'd refused to rest since they left the site, and now his pace quickened with each step. He kept glancing to his left toward the deep slope of a ravine that split from the old trail. Dalton caught up his rifle slung behind his shoulder, not for threat but for precaution. "Where's he taking us now?" he asked, breath fogging the air. Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. She could see it in Ranger's movements, his ears upright, head low, nose cutting through air as if memory itself had a scent. She felt her chest tighten. Ranger wasn't just tracking. He was reliving something. They came to a break in the tree line where the snow deepened suddenly. Ranger stopped and looked up at them. One paw lifted. Then he barked just once. Sharp. Urgent. Eli arrived last, holding a portable radio that had finally picked up a weak signal. Still no dispatch reply, he muttered, but trailed off when he saw where they stood. The ground sloped downward in a gentle drift leading to what looked like a snow-covered embankment. A strip of road barely visible ran beneath it, and something metallic glinted under the white. "Vehicle," Dalton said. They descended carefully, the crusted snow cracking beneath their steps. At the base, half buried, was the roof of a silver SUV. The snow had drifted over most of the vehicle, but a side mirror stuck out cracked and frosted. Emily reached the driver's side, brushing snow away from the window with her sleeve. Inside was darkness. Then she saw the outline of a face. Still. Frozen. Female. Her breath caught. "There's someone inside." Dalton pried open the driver's door while Eli moved to the passenger side. The cold air that rushed out was sharp with the smell of old plastic gasoline, and something fainter like wet wool and milk. Inside, the woman sat slumped, face pale, and blue hands still clutched around the steering wheel. She couldn't have been more than 30, a brunette with delicate features, her face etched with a kind of quiet desperation, even in death. Emily's voice cracked. "She's been here for days." Behind her, Eli opened the back seat and found a canvas diaper bag. He unzipped it and pulled out a bottle of powdered milk, a pack of formula, and wrapped tightly in a Ziploc, a small baby blanket with paw prints. "She was traveling with the pup," he murmured. "She brought supplies for him." Dalton stepped back, drawing in the full scope of the scene. The snow covered the car. Nobody knew she was here. Ranger let out a low sound, a half whine, half chuff, and moved to the rear of the vehicle. There, beneath a ridge of snow and ice, was a cell phone. Cracked screen. Dead battery. But the case had a faded sticker, "Adopt, don't shop." They brought it back to the truck and plugged it into Eli's charger. The screen lit up dimly, and after several failed tries, Emily guessed the passcode 1102. A child's birthday. The phone unlocked. There were messages. The last outgoing text was never sent, frozen in the outbox. "He took the other dogs. I'm going to find Milo. If I don't come back, tell someone. His name is Ranger. He's not just a dog. He's trained. He'll protect him." Emily's hand trembled slightly as she opened the photo gallery. The last image had been taken just a few days earlier, the woman smiling in front of the SUV, holding the brown puppy, smaller than he was, now wrapped in the same blanket Eli had found. In the background, Ranger stood alert, ears forward, wearing no collar, no vest. "Her name's Cassie Emily," said quietly. "Cassie Monroe. I recognize her now. She brought in strayed dogs 2 years ago during the spring floods. Sweet, soft-spoken. She always wanted to foster but didn't have the means. I think she finally did." Eli leaned over her shoulder. "She mentioned he took the other dogs. That has to be her ex." Dalton nodded grimly. And if he's tied to Sable Ridge, then she probably found out what they were doing and ran. Emily looked at Ranger, and he followed. Ranger stared back. Then slowly, as if the moment deserved reverence, he laid down beside the blanket. His tail didn't wag, but his eyes softened, and he closed them. They returned to the wildlife station in silence. Snow had lightened to a drifting whisper, but the sky remained low and gray. The roads had been plowed just enough to allow a slow descent back to town, where the main office stood in a grove of firs like a sentinel. Ranger lay quietly in the back of the truck bed beside the pup, who now stirred more regularly, its breaths stronger with each passing hour. Emily rode in the passenger seat, Cassie's phone in her coat pocket, her fingers absently brushing over it as though trying to warm something far colder than glass. They reached the station by late afternoon. As Dalton pulled in, they noticed a black SUV already waiting outside. A man stood beside it, tall and lean, wearing a tailored coat far too thin for the weather and holding a manila folder in gloved hands. Emily tensed immediately. "Who the hell is that?" Eli stepped down from the truck. "Looks like he's been waiting for a while." The man approached with a calm, purposeful stride. His name, he said, was Victor Kane. Mid-40s, olive skin, dark hair, peppered with gray at the temples, eyes so light they looked colorless. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried himself with an air of practiced civility. "Dr. Hayes." He greeted Emily, extending the folder. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Dalton stepped between them. "State your business." Victor offered a faint smile. "I represent a private canine recovery service contracted with a defunct rescue operation in Missoula. The German shepherd you're harboring was part of an experimental therapy program and was marked missing. I've brought the recovery paperwork and reacquisition authorization." Emily took the folder, flipping through the pages. The documents looked official, typed, stamped, even notarized, but something in her gut twisted. "Where's your license to transport across county lines? And who exactly contracted you?" Victor's smile didn't waver. "Unfortunately, the organization was absorbed into a private entity before litigation could be completed. I'm not at liberty to disclose their name." "That's convenient," Dalton muttered. Behind them, Ranger began to growl. Low at first, then louder throat rumbling as he stood and stepped down from the truck bed, positioning himself in front of the puppy. His body stiffened, ears pinned, teeth bared. It was not fear. It was fury. Victor's eyes flicked to the dog. He remembers. Emily stepped back now, gripping the collar with both hands. She crouched beside Ranger, one hand gently running under the leather where it met fur, brushing past the tag marked "Protect Him." Something sharp pricked her thumb. "A chip," she murmured. Eli appeared beside her with the portable scanner from inside the station. Emily held it over the collar base. A faint beep. The screen lit up, had VTR 2410. Registered Valor Therapeutic Rehabilitation Program. Status terminated. Handler discontinued. Custody unassigned. Dalton leaned over her shoulder. "Unassigned. Doesn't say Kane." Emily turned back to Victor. "According to this, he has no listed owner. He's not yours." Victor's voice cooled. "You don't understand what that dog is. He's not a pet. He's property developed, trained, and maintained under private funding. He's a controlled asset." Ranger snarled. Emily stood, stepping between them. "He's a living creature. And judging by the scars and behavior, he was mistreated. This chip proves only that he was discarded." Victor's expression darkened. "You're interfering with the recovery protocol. That's a violation of." Dalton raised a hand. "Enough. You can take your protocol and leave. The dog stays." Victor opened his mouth to protest when another vehicle pulled into the lot. A white SUV marked Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division. The woman who stepped out was in her early 50s, broad-shouldered and composed. Her name was Sarah Kendrick, the newly appointed Regional Welfare Supervisor. She wore a thick utility jacket, khaki pants, and heavy snow boots. Her blonde-gray hair was pulled back in a utilitarian bun, and her expression was unreadable. Sarah was known for being strict but fair, her reputation forged by uncovering abuse at a private zoo in Idaho 5 years earlier, an event that hardened her views on private animal ownership. She glanced at the scene, the growling dog, the folder in Victor's hands, the guarded stance of the others. "I got a call," she said to Dalton. "Someone reported a transport violation involving an unlicensed handler. That you, Dalton, didn't flinch." That'd be him. Victor stepped forward, irritation barely masked. "Officer Kendrick, I assure you I'm acting within recovery parameters." Sarah held up a hand already scanning the folder he handed her. "This paperwork isn't valid in this county. And this program," she tapped the header, "was shut down. I know. I helped write the final report." Victor's jaw clenched. Sarah turned to Emily. "Dr. Hayes, you're in possession of a chipped animal from a defunct agency. Current law states that custody reverts to local authorities for reassessment. If the animal is stable and not dangerous, you may proceed with placement or extended care." Emily nodded. "Understood." Sarah gave a short nod and stepped closer to Ranger, crouching. "You remember me?" she asked softly. "You were at the Missoula site, weren't you? You were quieter then." Ranger didn't growl. He lowered his head slowly as if recognizing her scent. Sarah reached forward and gently ran her hand along his back, stopping over one of the healing scars. Her voice was soft. "No one's taking you again. Not like that." Victor exhaled sharply. "This isn't over." Sarah straightened. "It is today. Leave." Victor hesitated, but with 3 witnesses, a county vehicle, and a dog still poised to defend the pup behind him, he turned and walked briskly to his SUV. Gravel crunched under his boots as he drove off, tires spinning slightly in the packed snow. Dalton watched him go. "He'll be back." Sarah looked at Emily. "So will I, to file the official transfer." Ranger relaxed, finally settling into the snow eyes on the pup. Emily placed a blanket over both of them and whispered, "Not property. Not anymore." 2 days had passed since Victor Kane drove away in silence, and the storm clouds that had loomed over Big Sky for a week finally broke into sunlight. Snow still clung stubbornly to rooftops and roadsides, but the air was lighter now, crisp clean, and no longer filled with threats. At the wildlife station, Ranger lay near the front desk on a thick navy fleece blanket. The small brown puppy curled tightly into his side. The pup, now more alert, chewed clumsily at a soft toy Emily had brought in from her clinic. Ranger watched him with quiet attentiveness, his breathing, steady ears twitching with every movement around him. Inside the office, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to focused. Emily sat at her desk, scrolling through scanned files, newspaper clippings, and archived emails. A local reporter had been calling repeatedly for an interview about the snow dog with the heart of a soldier, but Emily had politely declined every time. She wasn't ready to make this story public, at least not yet. Deputy Scott Dalton leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You know the sheriff's going to want to issue a statement." "I know," Emily replied, "but let's get the facts clean first." That morning, the sheriff's department had received a report from Detective Marcus Hale, a middle-aged investigator from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. Marcus was tall, weathered, and dressed in layers of brown flannel and denim that hadn't changed in 20 years. He was known for being sharp, patient, and immune to flattery, especially when dealing with animal abuse cases. A dog lover himself, Marcus had once been suspended for adopting a K9 unit without proper clearance. That compassion hadn't faded with time. Marcus entered the office, removing his gloves and tucking them into his belt. "I ran the trace on Kane," he said, handing a folder to Emily. "His real name's Victor Ledoux. Changed it after a sealed charge 10 years ago in Oregon. Neglect and unauthorized breeding in a behavioral research program. Case never saw court. Victims were all animals." Emily felt her hands clench. "So he's not just opportunistic. He's a repeat offender." "Exactly. And get this?" Marcus continued. "That puppy, we match the DNA to hair strands found in Cassie Monroe's apartment. He's hers. Confirmed. But Ranger's chip confirms he was transferred months ago under fraudulent paperwork, which makes him stolen." Dalton stepped in. "So we're officially looking at 2 victims and a suspect with a history." Marcus nodded. "And a potential trafficking network operating under the guise of therapy training. I already sent the file to the DA." Emily looked toward Ranger. He kept that puppy alive in a blizzard. He shielded him, starved for him, bled for him, all while running from someone trying to claim him as property, which makes him more than a victim, Marcus said. "It makes him a witness." Emily blinked. "Legally, can a dog be a witness?" Marcus smirked. "Not in the traditional sense, but his physical condition, the GPS data, the recovered footage, everything points to his direct experience being crucial. And that makes him untouchable by the likes of Cain." That afternoon, Sarah Kendrick returned. She stepped into the station with her signature brisk energy clipboard in hand, her breath steaming in the winter air. Her presence always felt like the swing of a judge's gavel, quiet but final. "I've filed the transfer paperwork," she announced. "Ranger is now officially under the protection of the Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division, which means no one touches him without court review." She knelt beside Ranger, running a practiced hand along his back. "You did good, old boy." Emily turned to her. "What happens next?" Sarah stood. "We compile the evidence. The report on Sable Ridge, the photos from the compound, Cassie Monroe's messages, the vehicle site, the cell phone, the files you found. Cain doesn't know it yet, but the walls are already closing in." Dalton walked over to the front counter where the local newspaper, the Gallatin Sentinel, had left a copy. The front page headline read, "Mystery Shepherd Saves Puppy in Storm. A Hero in Fur." "Too bad the real story's darker than they know," he muttered. Sarah tilted her head. "Sometimes the darkness makes the light stand out more." Before she left, Sarah handed Emily a microchip registration update. "I added your name as co-guardian." Emily blinked. "What? You've earned it." And so has he. Later that evening, a small ceremony was held quietly in the town's municipal office. No cameras, no reporters, just a few people who mattered. Ranger stood on all fours, head high, wearing a simple blue collar. Emily held the puppy now named Ash, short for Ashwood, where he'd first been found tucked warmly in a gray knit blanket. Sheriff Latham, a gruff but soft-spoken man with a military background and a fondness for working dogs, presented Emily with a framed certificate that read, "For exceptional loyalty and courage, Ranger Gallatin County." He looked down at the dog. "You remind us all what bravery really looks like." Ranger tilted his head. The room for a moment was still, and then Ash barked just once, a small, high sound. Ranger turned toward him, touched noses gently, and then sat down. Spring came late to Big Sky that year. Snow still lined the shaded side of the hills, and the wind carried the bite of winter even as crocuses pushed up through thawing soil. The wildlife station had changed in small but meaningful ways. Windows now bore colorful paw print decals, and a hand-painted wooden sign above the side building read, "Hollow Creek Refuge, for the lost and loyal." Emily Hayes stood on the gravel path that led to the converted barn. She wore her usual field jacket over faded jeans, her auburn hair twisted into a loose braid. Her boots were muddy, but her eyes shone. Since Ranger's rescue and the trial that followed, she'd used her veterinary background and growing support from the county to open a small-scale rehabilitation shelter for abandoned working dogs. There were only 6 runs and a communal play yard, but the place already felt alive. Ranger was no longer a patient. He was staff. The German shepherd had gained back much of his weight, and though one leg still showed a slight limp from an old tendon injury, his eyes had sharpened. He moved like a sentinel, watchful, measured. He wore a navy blue collar, now stitched with a custom patch guardian. It had been a gift from Sarah Kendrick, who'd visited during the grand opening just 2 weeks earlier, holding back uncharacteristic emotion as she handed Emily the final permit. Sarah still dressed in practical utility gear and still hid her softness behind clipped sentences, but her voice had caught when she'd whispered to Ranger, "You kept your promise." Emily watched now as Ranger crossed the open yard, tail low but relaxed. In the sun near the old maple stump lay Aspen, the name they'd finally chosen for the pup. No longer a fragile bundle of ribs and fear, Aspen had filled out into a strong golden-brown juvenile with bright eyes and boundless energy. His fur had darkened slightly around the muzzle, and he'd taken to chasing moths and sneaking socks from Emily's laundry basket. But today, Aspen wasn't alone. Curled beside him was a new arrival, a mottled gray and white pup, perhaps 6 weeks old, with a limp in one hind leg and nervous eyes. She'd been found 2 nights ago outside a rest stop off the interstate, tied to a crate with a note that read, "Too much for us." The pup had yet to bark, yet to play. But Aspen had taken to her immediately. From the porch, Liam Torres, the young park ranger who had taken Aspen under his wing, leaned against the railing with a warm smile. Liam was 25, lean and quick-footed, with curly black hair he never combed, and a kind face that always seemed one shade from a grin. Though soft-spoken, he moved with quiet confidence, a child of immigrants from New Mexico. Liam had joined the service after volunteering during the flood evacuations 2 years ago and had bonded deeply with Aspen since day one. "She hasn't left his side all morning," Liam called to Emily. Even let him nudge her to the water bowl. Emily crossed the grass, crouching near the 2 pups. Aspen had stretched one paw lightly across the new pup's back, a protective gesture so subtle yet unmistakable. Emily reached out slowly, running her fingers through the pup's matted fur. She flinched, but didn't retreat. "She's going to be okay," Emily murmured. Behind them, Ranger sat in the shade eyes, never leaving the scene. When Aspen glanced up at him, something passed between them, something unspoken but solid. Ranger gave a low, approving rumble. That night, after the pups had been fed and the yard had quieted under a sky full of stars, Emily stepped outside with a thermos of tea. She found Ranger at the edge of the yard, gazing out across the field where deer sometimes wandered at dusk. She sat beside him in silence. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked softly. "You gave him a chance, and now he's doing the same for her." Ranger didn't move, but his tail brushed the ground once. "You could have given up," she added. "In the snow, in that cage, in that life. But you didn't." He turned his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. Emily smiled. "You're not just a guardian, you're a teacher." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of Aspen barking, short and playful, followed by the light skitter of paws over gravel. The new pup barked once in return. Emily stood watching the 2 figures race through moonlight and shadows, Aspen always keeping just a step behind the smaller dog, nudging gently when she slowed. From behind her, Ranger let out a soft, satisfied growl. Then he laid down slowly in the grass, head on his paws, and closed his eyes. He wasn't worried anymore. He'd kept his promise. Sometimes God sends angels not with wings, but with paws. Ranger didn't speak, but he taught us everything about loyalty that doesn't quit love, that doesn't ask for anything in return, and the quiet strength it takes to protect the innocent. In the coldest storm, he became a shield. In the darkest moment, he became a light. And through him, we're reminded that even the most broken can be chosen to carry out something sacred. Maybe you've felt lost. Maybe you've been hurt. But just like Ranger, your pain can lead to someone else's miracle. And sometimes the one who saves is also the one who was saved. If you believe in second chances, if you believe God still works through the humble and the voiceless, then share this story. Leave a comment and tell us how this touched your heart. Type Amen if you believe there's a purpose behind every life, even a dog's. Subscribe to our channel Kindred Creatures to help us spread more stories of grace, healing, and hope. And may God bless every soul watching this. May you find warmth in the storm and light in the silence.